Hello and welcome to the demonstration video for the final draft of the freehand frame project. You should have already done the brainstorm and a little bit of practice with the freehand drawing techniques, but the next step is to decide which picture you want to use for your reference photo. Now, I selected this little inner tube kid as my reference photo, so I have found the picture I want, and right behind the page in the packet that you'll receive of the reference photos will be a black and white version. So you have both of these pictures to help you draw, and you're using that freehand frame method to help you draw the outlines of what you want your final draft to look like. Now, I chose to draw mine overlapping the frame partially, and that is going to mean that when I place this on my final frame, I'll need this to be in the same location. Something I was thinking about before I placed it is where my light source is. And because the light is shining this direction, you can see it's like hitting on her face and then creating a shadow. I chose to put her in the lower bottom right corner so that the shadow could come out this way and have some space as it reaches the corner. Now, once you've gotten your outlines, erase any extra sketchy marks you might have so that you've got nice clean lines. The next step is to take our black and white reference photo, and we are going to use that to help us color in for the first step. So our first step is to use this black and white reference photo to help us draw this using only a black colored pencil. Now you're going to create value scales, and anytime you fade all the way back out to white, it needs to have the softest transition, or else when we come back through with color, you're gonna have really abrupt sections. So you want to transition really smoothly and cleanly out, and you're really paying attention to the light source in your reference photo, because sometimes those light sources can be really challenging to figure out on your own. So we typically like to rely on the light source in the actual reference photo. Now, once you've gone through and shaded every single part that needs to have shadow, then you are going to continue into the coloring step. And before you do that, you need to consider which color of paper will help you create some contrast with your final layout idea. Now, when I was thinking about my final colors, I knew that I wanted to keep the orange and the pink of the sunglasses, so I chose not to use an orange or pink paper so that it would stand out against the background. I also was thinking about color schemes, so I chose to do a warm color scheme, so that's why I picked this golden yellow paper. Now, after I chose my paper, that's when I began coloring my final draft on the white paper. Now we draw and color on the white frame first so that our colors are not impacted by the color of our background. So we are coloring with colored pencil and filling it in, and we are reaching the burnished level, because when you color over the top of your black colored pencil, we really want to make it nice and solid and waxy by filling it all the way in with as much pressure as you can. And if you do fade out to white, you need to come in with the white colored pencil and burnish backwards from that space to make sure everything is nice and smooth and waxy and shiny, and you don't have any areas where you have lightly colored things in. Now, after you have finished coloring your piece, the next step is to cut it out. And you're going to cut it out from this white frame so that you have a free-floating little drawing that looks like this. So here's my little inner tube friend, and I have my yellow piece of paper. Now, I chose to cut it out around the frame, and that's a choice you can make on your own. You do not have to do that step. But now I am going to see where I want this to be placed, and I can kind of play around with my placement because the frame part that I have overlapping is kind of minimal. So if I wanted, I could like scooch this up as long as this part is still on one of those borders. Now, I think I'm still gonna kind of stick with my original plan. So I think I'm gonna keep my person right about here. The next step is to come in with a pencil, and we are just going to trace right where this is. And this is where we want our final to be glued down. So be careful not to go out with too many lines. We just want to like show ourselves right where this is going to be glued down. So we're holding it down, just kind of moving our hands very carefully when we need to shift where we are outlining. And it doesn't have to be perfect. This is just to help you place it back in the original location where you wanted it. Now let's check before we move it that we've got all of the outlines we need. I'm missing the back of this hand here, so let me just add that in. And there is where my shape is going to be. Now the next step, I'm going to keep this at the same angle and I'm going to scooch this forward. And I'm going in the same angle as the shadow. So now I'm going to choose where do I want this shadow to be placed. And once I decide, I'm going to go through and trace just right along those edges. Now with this one, we really want to be careful that we get all of these outside edges so that we don't miss any details that we need to copy for our shadow. So this one is telling us where to draw the shadow. The other border was telling us where to glue down our piece when we're done. So this part is quite important. I'm going to give myself this hollow space. I chose to cut out my hollow space, but you can choose for yourself if you would like to do that step. Now what we're going to do next, we are going to take a charcoal pencil and we're going to go through and we're going to fill in the border, but we are not filling the border where it overlaps with where we are gluing. And that's very important because we don't want to have to glue on top of charcoal. That is much harder to do than to glue on just a regular piece of paper. Now I'm going to go through and give myself a border, and I'm just going to do that to help myself fill this a little bit faster. So I'm going around giving myself that border. I'm not really going to pay attention to the hollow part here. And I'm going to use nice oval shapes to fill this in. And I'm rotating my pencil so that I don't accidentally get all the way to the wood casing and not have charcoal coming out as I'm drawing. So I'm just going through and filling this in from one end to the other. And you can use the bigger sticks of charcoal, but I think that it's kind of a personal basis because I have a smaller area, so I didn't feel like I needed to switch to one of those bigger pastel sticks. But if you do have a really large area, then I would consider switching. Now I am just gonna finish filling this in, and I'm starting to run out of available charcoal on the end, so I probably could have used a pastel, but here we go. Now I've gotten my charcoal shadow filled in. The next step is to take your blending stump, and we are just going right in the actual shadow space, and we're just making this nice and solid. So I'm gonna go the opposite direction of the way that I was coloring, using longer ovals again. And I'm also using the side of the blending stump to make this step go faster. Now I am just blending that out, going the opposite direction of how I colored. And once I've got this solid edge and the space filled in, I'm gonna go around the outside edge now. And I've got a lot of charcoal on my blending stump, so this is gonna give us some nice soft pastel-y fade outs. Now I'm just doing one pass all the way around the entire shadow space, and I'm using this to soften and smudge out the outside edge because we don't want it to be too perfect because shadows quite often are not perfect. Now we are just going to go through and blend this out. And I'm just overlapping with the edge to make sure that I'm softening that edge enough to make it look like a realistic shadow. Now I'm going to just fade that out around the medium tone I've created, and I'm just getting softer and softer. But our real goal is to try to get rid of like that perfect border of our shadow here. So I've just worked around that space, and I'm trying to slowly fade it out to the color of my frame. Now, once I've done that, I can take my piece and place it back where it's gonna go. Ooh, that's cool. And I think I'm gonna fill in this space where the negative space is, but I'm gonna be careful not to do too much. so that I can still glue my piece successfully. So I've added that into that hollow space. Now I'm just gonna like continue filling to get this to be nice and soft, and you can take more time to go through and perfect your shadow, but the next step is to glue down your original drawing. So we're going to glue that piece down, and the final step, you have the freedom to go through and choose how you would like to color your frame. So I might go through and try to like pull in some of the orange of my intertube into my frame by just like adding a stripe of orange, and all of a sudden that's got a nice little pop to it. I could also go through and like choose to color some of the details here, or I could come in with another color and continuously add more to my frame to make it more interesting, and also to make the frame stand out as a separate space from the background of our picture. So you will go through, and using a glue stick, you'll fill in the back of your original drawing with glue. Oops, try not to bend it. And we're gonna go all the way to the edges. So try to use a scrap piece of paper so that you can go all the way to the edges without getting it on the table. Then we're going to take this and place it right into the outlines. There we go. Make sure her little hand is where it should be. Okay, now I would just, oops, and I've got a little tilt. I have to pay attention to the frame angle as well. There we go. Now I can still go through and add some charcoal, and I especially want to darken the space that's like right up against the intertube or right up against your object. So I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna draw in right up against that intertube, and I'm going to just add the darker patch here. And then I'm going to fade that out. And your last and final step, you have the option to glue this down onto a black piece of paper to make your border have some contrast. So this is what the final end result would look like. I hope that you have so much fun with this. There's so many options and room for creativity, and I'm excited to see what all of you come up with. Thank you so much for watching.